Good morning and welcome to today's episode of the Carrie Barrett Show Live. We are talking about personality today. We'll get to that in just a second, but first, a quick introduction. I am Carrie Barrett. I'm the go-to consultant for executives and law firms who want to uplevel their visibility with effective virtual communication and professional presentation skills for business development, for media opportunities, client attraction, acquisition, marketing, whether you are in the courtroom or whether you are in the boardroom. So, with that out of the way, let's dive into today's topic, which is personality. And you may be thinking, how exactly does this have anything to do with my business or my business growth or my memorability or my relatability or the impact that I have? In essence, why is personality important? So I'm going to give you a little bit of sort of the background or the backdrop, if you will, into why personality is important. And I'm saying this with my background in the news industry / entertainment industry, because news is also entertainment. If you have not been in a news environment or an entertainment industry before, there is a pretty strong likelihood that you and your team are underestimating the power of personality in your delivery, whether you are in front of the lens, whether you are on a stage, whether you are in a conference room in front of the camera, whether it's social media, whatever, a panel discussion, a moderation environment. Personality is important in all of those arenas. So we'd like to think that we are very data driven, right? We analyze, we're logical, and we are to some degree, but you've probably heard that old expression when it comes to buyers, and that is that we buy with emotion and then we justify with all those other things that I just mentioned: logic, data, analysis, that sort of stuff. However, the truth is that most of us are far more driven by less tangible elements. It's not necessarily analytics or data, even if we are, a D on the DISC analysis, and we think that we're very dominant and analytical. There is a subset of emotion that is driving the choices that we make and the things that we do. Personality, relatability, humor, infotainment or edutainment, as I like to call the video content that many businesses are looking to create, that sort of delivery, that sort of personality drives much greater impact, memorability, if you will, than data. And being memorable is important, whether you're entering a room or whether you are in front of the lens. And that's because there's so much other noise out there. There's so much other competition. There's so many other businesses and people that we're going up against. We have to leverage every single element that we can in order to have an impact. We like to learn. We like the information and the education part, but we also like the learning to be fun, if it can be. And that is driven, that fun element, if you will, in large part by the person who is delivering that information. So it may be visuals, it may be storytelling, it may be the way that they're talking about something, but a big portion of that is who you are and how you're able to show that, again, on the lens, on the stage, in the conference room. It doesn't mean, and I think personality or entertainment is widely misconstrued as people thinking it means that you have to be goofy or that you need to be a stand-up comic, someone other than you are, meaning inauthentic. That's not true. There are some people who will be naturally better at this than others, and that's fine, but we can all get better. We can all leverage the skills and the personality elements that we do have that are working for us, and then we can have greater impact. The reason personality, excuse me, is so scary for so many people is that it's much harder to understand, to judge, to determine an ROI, if you will, out of it. It's more nebulous. a little more vague, ephemeral, if you will. How many adjectives can what I'm trying to say here? And if you have questions, please go ahead and drop them in the comments. But if somebody doesn't like our delivery style, not the words that we're saying necessarily, but perhaps the way that we're saying them or our personality, our presentation, it feels a lot like they don't like us. Data, the thing that we're generally more comfortable with, is very easy to understand and it's very impersonal, meaning there's no judgment about who we are as a person when we're strictly delivering data. But that is not as memorable. Personality, by its very definition, is very personal. And that makes it different. And that makes it harder to understand or judge or analyze, especially if you are in an industry that tends to be perhaps a little bit more stoic or traditional. Insurance, finance degree as well. And so there's a certain box that we see content from those industries fit into. But I would be willing to bet that while you may have a general vague notion of the video or delivery that you see from people in those industries, you would be hard pressed to remember one specifically, a person or a specific topic, because it was delivered with such a degree of memorability and impact and relatability that it stood out from the rest. And when we stay in that little box, we certainly feel quite a bit more safe, but you'll understand the issue there. There's no impact because people are not remembering who you are and what you're doing. And so there is a boundary, there is a fine line, and it depends on who the audience is and what it is exactly that you do and what you're teaching them to do. There's a fine line between, let's say, like Winston Churchilling it, being very perfect and methodical, and sort of like, take me as I am, take it or leave it. There's a balance in between those two. And that's actually something we're going to jump into in a little more detail in next week's episode. But when you think about data versus personality, and data, I'm going to think about as how much you know about a topic, how many statistics and how much information you can spit out. The truth is, sort of much like I talked about when you're on a stage or in front of a camera, how many people are memorable in those sorts of industries that have somewhat generic content or speakers. It is not always the best mind or the brightest person in the business that's chosen to either be the influencer or to have the most views on their content or generate the most clients from it, or to be chosen to be a regular contributor, let's say on some sort of media outlet, MSNBC, Fox Business, CNBC, whatever it is, whoever you're looking to get. Instead of being the best and brightest mind in the business, it's often the person that makes good TV or good content that gets chosen, that gets the most eyeballs, that builds the credibility. And the reason when I say makes good TV, I mean they're interesting. The audience wants to watch them. And because the audience wants to watch them, they can hold the audience, they can have the most impact, and they can use those visibility opportunities or client pitching opportunities to drive sales, to drive business development, to drive visibility and awareness. So if you've had any aha moments, I'd love you to go ahead and drop them in the comments. Any way perhaps that you've seen what I'm talking about implemented that makes sense, maybe now just understanding why a piece of video content or someone that you saw on a stage or someone that was pitching you had such an impact or was so powerful. If you have any moments like that, go ahead and drop them in the comments and drop your questions there as well. At the end of this episode, I will go back and answer them for you. So first, I want to talk about the impact of personality on audience engagement. And if you've watched any of my content or have attended any of my live sessions or listened to my podcast in the past, you may be aware of this story. But There was a time, I have a background in the news industry. I was on air as an anchor and reporter and producer for about 20 years, finished my career in New York City to NBC. But there was a period, I would say up until about 7 to 8 years in the business, where I could read a teleprompter or deliver the news in a way that was almost technically perfect. Now, there's never anything that even comes close to perfection in terms of performance, content, etc. But reading the words, I could do it perfectly. And at the end of the day, when the words are on the teleprompter, that's what you're supposed to be doing. But what I wasn't able to do was have an impact. My audience didn't really remember me. They didn't really connect with me. And it's not because my words were perfect. It wasn't that perfection was the enemy there. It was because there was nothing else really going on the lens. I wasn't able to connect because I was just so focused on having my broadcaster's voice and getting out the words in the dulcet tones that I needed them to be spoken in. And so it wasn't until I moved from Salt Lake City, which is where I was in that sort of 7 to 9 year range, and moved on to my next station, which was in Philadelphia, that I began to understand the power of actually connecting. Now, let me be clear. In Philadelphia, we had a 6 hour morning show while I was there. It's longer now. And much of it was unscripted, meaning it was unscripted interviews. There was a lot of very personality driven content. There was a lot of camaraderie and crosstalk, as it's called in the industry, between anchors and reporters and sometimes producers, even though they were unseen to the audience. And it was in that period of time that I learned about the power of actually connecting, because I wasn't just reading words off of the teleprompter. I had to share more of whom I was because I had to fill time. And even in the questions that I asked or the way that I was able to interact with a guest or a co-anchor, and likewise co-anchors and guests interacting with me, revealed a little bit more about who I was. And the audience got a better sense of who I was and what I was like. And that created impact. And it was really in my time there in Philadelphia that I learned that it wasn't about reading a teleprompter perfectly. It was more about creating impact. And absolutely, there were mistakes made. There are going to be mistakes made in a 6 hour live television show when you are doing a lot of ad libbing, especially. And so it was understanding that it was the personality that was upping the audience engagement. And it was scary, right? This was not a traditional news program. I was used to traditional news, much like people who are used to creating traditional client pitches or traditional video content for the website or for LinkedIn. It's not that that's bad. It's often just that it's generic and the audience struggles to connect. So having personality is what keeps you from being generic and makes you stand out, brings the right people in. Again, it doesn't mean that you need to be goofy. It just means that there's more to speaking in front of a lens or on a stage than delivering data and statistics and information. If you want to have impact, if you want to be memorable, you must be relatable, and that means revealing part of yourself. So the takeaway here is that infotainment or edutainment, as you may call it, is a valuable tool for creating material that is not just memorable, but also enjoyable and has impact for your audience. Now, there is, as I mentioned, an art and science to bringing information, education, if you will, and this delivery and entertainment element together, right? It's storytelling, visual aids. A lot of it is the delivery, the conversational tone that you may use, understanding that your audience doesn't understand the jargon that you may use within your industry, in the legal industry, for example, legalese, your clients don't necessarily know what those certain words mean. And so you don't need to use them in order to enhance your credibility. The fact that they're already listening to you means that they have granted you some credibility already. Now you need to keep them there. If you had any aha moments or any questions from that, this is your opportunity to go ahead and drop them in the chat. Now I want to talk about the part that makes personality so scary, and it is the fear of judgment. And because it does feel very personal, it feels like a rejection when somebody doesn't like you. It's not just that the data went wonky or they're not interested in the facts. If you're showcasing who you are when you're speaking and somebody rejects you, it feels like a punch to the gut. It's very, very personal. And to go back to the example that I used, when I moved from just trying to be a perfect news anchor to actually having an impact and a measure of engagement from the audience, it was very scary because of exactly what I described. If they reject this, now that I'm talking about this, or they reject me, now that I'm talking about this thing, it means that they don't like me, that they're rejecting me as a person, not just that they don't like the way I read the news or they didn't like the news that day or it made them angry, but they actually don't like me. And that's the part that gets scary. Now, it was a process for me to get from point A to point B. And when I work with my clients, it's a process to get to that point as well. And part of that process is understanding where their strengths and weaknesses are, where there's room within their industry to step outside of that box that people tend to put themselves into, understanding what it is they're talking about, what their audience expects for them, and what would delightfully surprise their audience in seeing something new or different, and therefore having a greater impact, greater memorability, more relatability, more visibility, a more powerful connection with whomever it is. And listen, I talk a lot about being on camera, but everything that I'm speaking about here also dovetails with the way that you need to communicate when you're in person as well. Some of the skills for delivering are different, especially if you're delivering, say, a client pitch with a group. That could be in person or it could be virtually. And so the skills that you're deploying and the way that you're deploying them are different. But conceptually, what I'm talking about overlaps no matter where you are, whether you're in front of the lens, whether, again, you are on a stage, or whether you are in a conference room or on a virtual call with your team or internal or external stakeholders within your industry or business. And so the process is pretty simple to get from point A to point B. It's just scary to take the steps. And what it means is when you're planning what it is that you're going to say, and you should always be doing that until you get to a point where you have it down pat, but it means intentionally doing something that sort of makes you dip a big toe again outside of that box that we tend to put ourselves in when it comes to creating content, delivering, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how many times have you gone to an industry conference and you've seen speaker after speaker after speaker get up and drone on about statistics and analysis, and one blends right into the other, and then you have one that comes up and they're talking about the same thing, but they're not afraid to smile and laugh and make a self-deprecating joke or use a story or an analogy that makes sense. And that one difference makes that person stand out. Again, as I referenced prior, it depends a little bit on your industry, to whom you're talking, what the expectations are. But there's a balance between all of the entertainment and all of the information. And it's finding that sweet spot in between the two. And so, what I would suggest is every day, open your phone, whatever it is that you generally use to record on, and riff. Riff for 60 seconds about something in your industry and try something that deliberately puts you out of your comfort zone, whether it's a joke, whether it is a story about something that happened to you that morning on the way to work or with your kids that makes you a little bit more relatable, but can be tied back to the broader message of your video or your speech or your presentation. Do something that deliberately takes you out of your comfort zone and forces you to reveal a little bit of yourself. Again, this is an art. There are some industries rather where it's going to be very easy and you can push way outside of the envelope. And there are going to be some where that's not so much the case. For example, I recently created a video series for accountants. It was a video ad series with a colleague. And we decided to do something very creative. And the purpose of this video campaign was to target small accounting firms and let them know how they could bring in clients the same way that the big guys do. Intuit, TurboTax, etc. And those guys, the big guys, they run digital ads, video ads all the time. The real difference for a small accounting firm is the face behind the firm, the long-term relationship that regional or local accounting firm has with their clients. And so the ad was saying you need to be on video and we can help you do it. Well, I started the ad by waking up out of bed, right? I was laying down and I sat up and I said, you ever wonder how Intuit and TurboTax, generate hundreds of thousands of clients each day and every day? They don't wake up like that. They blah, 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 blah. That image of me being in bed, dressed and clothed in the whole 9 yards, but then sitting up and throwing the sheets back, that was just a little bit too much for a very stoic industry, accounting. And so we had to recalibrate where we went. What we found was, though, that it did have impact. People watched, but it wasn't the right kind of impact. And it felt for me in that moment like they were rejecting me. Oh, I revealed a little bit too much of myself. No, it was just that we hadn't found the right balance for that particular audience. So my point in relaying that story is to let you know that there's no equation. You do this, and you're going to nail the outcome. It's discovering where your audience's capacity is for difference, discovering where their hard boundary is, and then walking right up to that line and revealing a little bit of yourself. I hope that made sense. So really, it's about building confidence, and it is about desensitization when you overcome that fear of judgment and you're bringing in your unique personality to the content and the video that you're putting together. And so outside of knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, what you feel comfortable doing and what you don't feel comfortable doing, write down a list of pros and cons. I'm good at this. I'm not good at this. I feel perfectly comfortable doing this. I don't feel so comfortable doing this. And I will tell you, I didn't feel comfortable, waking up out of bed and throwing the covers off and saying they didn't wake up like that. But I pushed myself anyway to go there. And that's what you need to do. Push yourself out of your comfort zone every single day, even if you have no intention of hitting publish or putting it on your website. And then you find where that sweet spot is over time. I help my clients make that process a little bit shorter with my eye and my experience as well. But listen, the best of the best, the biggest and boldest and baddest marketing agencies in the world make those mistakes as well. It's finding out that balance between the two. I hope that you found some information helpful in that. If you have questions or comments or an aha moment, go ahead and drop them in now. All right, so we talked about the power of personality in engagement. We talked about how to overcome some of the fear and the judgment, and you will experience that. So that's sort of a forewarning as well. Don't expect to be comfortable when you're doing this. I want to talk now about the power of personality in professional settings, right? So certainly some of those more stoic industries that I spoke about. But there's a lot of noise, as I mentioned, out there in the digital space, right? There's a lot of noise, period. But it is possible to break through, finding where that sweet spot is, but also understanding that it's not just about being good at your job anymore. It's not about having a team that's good at their jobs anymore. It's about having an impact. It's about using every opportunity that you have to create awareness content, top of mind content, interest content, desire content, action content. And when I say content, and I'm putting that in air quotes now, it's because I mean that can be a recorded video, it can be live video, it can be a media opportunity, it can be an elevator speech, it can be a client pitch. All of those things are content. And you need to be able, speaking engagements, you need to be able to use all of them to leverage to your fullest capacity, your ability to grow your business and scale, right? And so when you are able to use personality in those settings, you create by default awareness, interest, visibility. And ultimately the client may turn away from you, or the potential client the prospect may turn away from you, but that's okay. They probably were not a good fit to begin with. You using your personality has the dual effect of drawing in the right people and pushing away the wrong ones. So the people who are reaching out to you or the people who are responding to you, they've already been qualified in terms of prospects or leads. So I do have a client who is in the legal space, and this client wanted to create a web series as a way to gain visibility and credibility on this particular subject. And when we first began to work together, the information was delivered in a way that was absolutely helpful and educational, but was very sort of rote and mechanical, and it felt canned, for lack of a better word. I had no idea. If I had been watching this video as a cold audience, I really would have no idea who this person is, because this person was simply spitting out material that a quick Google search could also provide me the same information. That was not eloquently worded, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say there. This person wasn't giving me anything that I couldn't find on Google or someplace else on YouTube. And it doesn't mean necessarily that the information has to be different. It just needs to be delivered in a slightly different way that makes people sit up and take notice. You want them sitting on the edge of their seats and hanging on to your every word. When we were able to loosen the delivery, make it a little less stiff, write in a way that was more conversational as we were coming up with the talking points and the roughly hewn script, if you will. We were also able to inject a little bit of humor into the way that this person talked about this particular subject, which happened to be IP, intellectual property. And we noticed that not just in video, but in client pitches and in podcasts and in other content or visibility opportunities, there was an increase in engagement. There was an increase in views rather, and in watch times. People were watching through to the end of the web series, where appropriately enough was the call to action. And so we were able to generate a lot of signups to their lead magnet and their newsletter, which now is, of course, those clients or potential clients are being nurtured through. So there's a balance, as I've mentioned, and there is a level of importance in, again, understanding your audience, understanding your authenticity, and finding a personal style that complements your professional expertise and your audience. So how can you start doing that? How can you start incorporating personality in a professional setting? Two of the easiest ways are to share a relatable story or use natural humor to make a point. And a relatable story doesn't necessarily have to be something that happened to you. It can be something that happened with a client or a colleague that you know. And you want to leave out identifying details, certainly, but if you're able to use a personal story or a small dose of humor, I always like to say, if you can get your audience to smile or laugh and the rest of your message is on point, you're 90% of the way there. Most people do not smile or laugh when they're listening to a speech at an industry conference rather, or they're watching video. But if you can get them to smile or laugh, you are 90% of the way there. So think about stories that you can use when you're speaking from the stage or you are speaking in front of the lens. And this should not be a story that necessarily takes 5 minutes to deliver. It needs to be something that has the ability to be delivered rather in 15 seconds or less rather. Story, I can't talk today. Oh my gosh, I'm a mess. Story is really point A, point B, and the way that you got from here to there, right? This is the story part. And if you can shrink it down to 15 seconds, you have the ability to use that story almost anywhere. Side note, I wasn't going to get into this, but creating stories in sort of a modular format is a great way to be able to use a similar story in a keynote and in a 15-second, Instagram reel. So if you have a story that's 3 minutes, create it in modules. So there are parts of it that are not absolutely necessary to have, or there are subparts that you can shorten or reduce. So it's the accordion method is what it's called. The ability to expand or contract based on where you are and how quickly you need to get your point across. A 2 minute and 30-second media hit on the Today Show is quite a different format than a 60-minute keynote or client pitch, if you will. And so you're going to use your stories in two different ways in those formats. The same story might be applicable, just create it in a way that's modular so you don't have to keep rewriting it or reinventing the wheel every time that you have a different format in which you are speaking. So any surprises, any aha moments, any questions that you have, now is the time to go ahead and drop them in the chat. So to recap what we talked today, personality is important in terms of having impact, in terms of having memorability, in terms of being relatable, but it can feel scary because personality is very much you driven. It's not data driven, it's you. And it feels a little bit vague and it feels a little bit nebulous and it's much more slippery than data is. And it feels personal. If somebody rejects us when we're showing ourselves, it feels like a punch to the gut. It feels like they are rejecting who we are, that we are inherently not good enough or that we are not capable. It's going to feel like that. It will always feel like that. That's just part and parcel of putting yourself out there. And I know that is a tired and overused phrase, but it really is sort of the seminal moment in creating all of this other opportunity for yourself and for your team. It's finding the right balance between what is natural and authentic to you, what your audience expects, and what it is that you are talking about. It is important when you are creating, when you are speaking, and you have to take deliberate and intentional steps in order to move from fear to fearless is not a real thing. There's always fear there, but being able to deliver even when you are feeling the fear. Coming up next week, I mentioned a little bit earlier in this show, there's a difference between sort of what I like to call the Winston Churchill standard and the, take me as I am standard, flaws and all. And neither one is right or wrong, but it's understanding where the sweet spot is for you, right? This one tends to be personality heavy. This one is memorable, but more stoic. It's more of an orator, if you will, style than a speaking style and an engagement style. Most people in more, again, stoic or traditional industries find that they default to that Winston Churchill standard, even if it's very data and statistical heavy information. Let's find the right spot for you versus, Winston Churchill versus all of your flaws and all of your silliness put out there for everybody to see. I know we talk about the power of imperfection and authenticity. There is a sweet spot. We don't need to hear, see, or know everything. So that is what we are going to be talking about next Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern, same time, same place. If you are interested in booking a confident on camera free strategy call, you can do so using the booking link. You'll find it in the show notes, calendly.com, Carrie Barrett, confidence on camera strategy call. Once again, the link is in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you back here, same time, same place next week.